Welcome to the Sound of Southern Charm podcast. I'm Stephen George, and I'm hoping to give you some inspiration and remind you of what you already know. You just need to keep going. Today, I'm going to continue my series called Mountaintop Moments, a macro view of the lessons I've learned in my working life. I created the name Mountaintop Moments because I grew up a few minutes away from the Blue Ridge Parkway. And when I was old enough to drive, I took several trips up there to enjoy the scenery. And like the stunning view from there, this podcast series is going to take a positive look at the big picture messages from all my jobs to this point. So let's get started. All right, I'm super excited today to talk about my next step in my career development, which is when I stepped into the television newsroom. And just like some other career opportunities I've already discussed, it happened because of a chance meeting. I was a junior in college when I signed up for a news writing class. Because the course was an elective, I was one of maybe only 2 or 3 people out of 20 or so that was actually interested in news writing at the time. I remember being a little curious when I noticed the name of the professor, because it closely resembled that of somebody who was already a local news anchor. And the only reason I knew that is because of my job at Double C, because I was getting up early enough to get ready and watch the news in the morning. It's a pretty safe bet that most of the other people in that class were not doing the same thing. My suspicions were confirmed the first day of class. You could say I was a little awestruck, because here was this guy very well known in the community, and he was about to share some of his experience to help me move forward hopefully in my career. He proved to me that old saying of those who can't teach is dead wrong. I was pretty confident in my writing skills at the time, but writing for television news was a little different. If you'll remember, my previous background was writing research papers in high school, writing college papers, and then transitioning that to writing articles for my hometown newspaper. So I was used to writing these big, long pieces. But for television news, you don't have time for that. You've got to get it down to 25-30 seconds, sometimes 45. If you're a reporter, that can be extended to 1.5 to 2 minutes, as long as you can get some good sound in between. I'll have more on that in a bit. But I remember specifically for the final project, we had to write a 30-minute newscast. I remember that being painstaking. How in the world could I write 30 minutes worth of news? And being the typical college kid, I remember waiting until the last minute to do it. So I remember writing very late/early into the next morning. I think I got a pretty good grade on that, though. This professor also gave us a bonus at the end of the semester. He gave us the opportunity to take a behind-the-scenes look at his news station. There was only a handful of us that decided to do that. I was floored at the opportunity. I had never gotten an experience like that before. When we arrived, we first started in the newsroom, which was full of cubicles with reporters and producers all typing away at the same time. The newsroom is a machine like no other. There are things constantly happening, and you've got to be ready to move at the drop of a hat, because the name of the game is to be ready for anything. And thanks to the hard work of a lot of people behind the scenes, it's a chaotic choreography like nothing you've ever seen. Now, getting back to the tour. Once we were finished in the newsroom, he showed us the production control room. I'll explain more about what goes on in there in a little while. And the last stop was the studio. The studio is where the magic happens for everybody at home, and I got to be front and center for an actual live newscast. So my view was better than the one that I usually get when I'm watching at home. All I remember feeling is excitement. I remember feeling that I needed to be a part of that. I didn't know how it was going to happen, but I was going to make it happen. So the newscast is over, the tour's finished, it's time to go home. And I'm thinking, now what? All my communication with this particular professor/news anchor is about to be over. But I want to be a part of this, so what do I do? I'm pretty sure this professor saw that I wanted to be involved, and he was willing to take a chance on me. So he let me know that they may be looking for studio camera operators in the coming weeks. I remember going back to my apartment at the time and checking out the career opportunities listed on the station's website, where they did in fact have camera operators listed. I immediately filled out that application. I remember being called in for an interview with the engineering department. I remember being so nervous it was probably one of the worst interviews I've ever given. Thankfully, despite my terrible interview skills, I was hired as a studio operator for the morning news. It was only a part-time job, but that's all I could afford because remember, I was still in school at the time. I didn't have my college degree, but that also meant that I had to cut back on my job at Double C. So in May of 2005, I started my career in television news. I was getting up at 3 or 3:30 in the morning to be at the station at 4 or 4:30 for the live news to start at 5. At the time, there were 3 studio cameras there, and we had to all manage shots between 5 news anchors, 2 on the main desk, the meteorologist, the traffic person, and sometimes on sports. So how did we know where to be and what shots to take? Well, those shots were all pre-selected by producers, who then handed over those pre-selected shots to the director of the show. The director of the show then lines up everything to make sure it's all going to work before they hand it over to the studio camera operators. So there were multiple layers of processing before it ever reached my camera. The coolest thing about being a camera operator was having one-on-one conversations with the news anchors. For most people, they only ever see these people through their television screen. And here I was just a few feet away from these people, laughing and cutting up and just having normal conversations. No big deal, right? I will never forget how kind those people were to me. They didn't have to be. They really treated you like family. And prior to that job, I hadn't really been exposed to what it was like to work in a team environment. Especially with like Double C, I was used to working on my own all the time. Now, I did work in the warehouse with some people, but it was on a much different scale than this. And the impact of what I was doing felt a little bit more intense. So because these people went out of their way to be nice to me, I wanted to make sure that I was working as hard as I possibly could for them. I was not taking this chance lightly. After working as a studio operator for several months, an opportunity came up to be an intern in the newsroom. So I signed up through my college so it would be one of my last college classes I'd ever take. That's the whole point of an internship, to give you a little taste of what it's like to work in a potential career. Now, if you'll remember from previous episodes, I decided when I was about 16 that I wanted to be a local television news reporter, so I looked at this as the next step. During that internship, I learned a lot about writing a newscast. At the end of my internship, I made a really dumb mistake that could have cost my career. As most of you may remember, an internship is outlined by the number of hours you work. Once you reach the limit of those hours, you're done, or at least that's how I took it. I finished my credit hours early in the month of May, and I just kind of dropped off. I was still working there as a studio operator, but I wasn't showing my face in the newsroom because I was done. Well, pretty soon that caught up with me. After a couple of days of not showing up for the internship during my predetermined hours, I started getting phone calls from the executive producer of the morning news, wondering where I was. His message sounded pretty urgent, so I called him back and kind of let him know my thought process and how, I had kind of fulfilled my requirements. But he quickly reminded me that this was still a job and I needed to be there. And oh, by the way, that there was a position opening up for an associate producer. Basically, in the nicest way possible, he said, "Don't mess this up." You better believe I got ready and went in as soon as possible. So by the time I graduated college with my degree, I had a full-time job in the career that I chose. I don't know the statistics on that, but I'm not sure that happens very often. There is so much more that goes on in a newsroom, and I'm excited to talk about it in future episodes of this podcast. Next time, I'm going to talk about one of the hardest decisions I ever had to make, and I don't use that term lightly. But a career convergence at a particular moment in time changed the trajectory of what I was going to do. Be sure to subscribe to find out the next part of the story. If you're interested in working together, check out my samples at stephengeorgevo.com. You can also email me at steven@stephengeorgevo.com. See you next time.